Aisha was seated on the undeniably chilly floor of her bedroom, her arms clasped firmly, almost painfully, around her knees, a posture of self-protection she had adopted too often. Recent injuries, stark and livid, were visible on her face, each bruise and scrape serving as sore, throbbing evidence of the brutal assault she had suffered at her husband's hands the previous evening. A profound, visceral understanding resonated deep within her, an undeniable instinct for survival, signaling that she ought to depart from this place of torment. Any woman possessing even a modicum of basic wisdom and self-preservation would have gathered her meager belongings and fled this nightmare long ago. Yet, the haunting question remained: what conceivable destination awaited her? The disapproving voice of her mother resonated insistently in her thoughts, an unwelcome, echoing occupant. Phrases uttered to her on the very day of her ill-fated marriage, words that had effectively bound her, like invisible shackles, to this miserable existence, replayed endlessly. A wife must persevere, demonstrating unwavering endurance in her husband's home. Irrespective of the circumstances, no matter how dire, do not ever return to us. It is unequivocally forbidden, a deep shame, for a woman to go back to her father's dwelling after marriage. Tears, hot and heavy, cascaded down Aisha's cheeks, blurring her vision at the painful recollection of those binding pronouncements. Her two young offspring, innocent and entirely dependent, were the sole, powerful factors anchoring her there. The mere notion of a different woman, a stranger, bringing them up, or far worse, subjecting them to the kind of ill-treatment she herself endured, caused her a deeper, more gut-wrenching anguish than any physical assault ever could. This pervasive, paralyzing dread tethered her to this fractured, loveless union. This dread, a constant companion, compelled her to withstand the unending cycle of suffering, the stinging affronts to her dignity, and the relentless violence from the man who was, by societal decree and sacred vow, meant to cherish and protect her. Aisha had never, not for a single moment, desired to wed Seko. At the tender age of 20, she had been brimming with vibrant aspirations, effervescent with existence, and genuinely enthusiastic about the prospect of commencing university, envisioning with youthful optimism the creation of her own thriving enterprise. However, her parents, driven by their own priorities, harbored entirely alternative intentions for her future. Everything commenced, the downward spiral of her life, on the day her sole brother, Bakery, engaged in a pivotal conversation with their father, Jelani. Bakery expressed a fervent desire to journey to Accra, the bustling capital, to launch an ambitious importation business. Bakery, the family's undeniably cherished, doted upon son, the one who had consistently frittered away every single opportunity ever presented to him, leaving a trail of disappointment. The one who conducted his life with a reckless, irresponsible abandon, consumed excessive amounts of alcohol, indulged heavily and ruinously in gambling, and invariably returned home, tail between his legs, seeking refuge and further financial assistance, always armed with fresh, often flimsy, justifications for his failures. Nevertheless, he was their only male child, a position of privilege in their cultural context, and because of this singular fact, he was perceived as inherently incapable of error, his misdeeds consistently overlooked or excused. Their father had previously sold significant parcels of valuable family land to finance Bakery's earlier, ill-conceived business ventures, each of which had culminated in predictable, ignominious failure. But now, the well had run dry. There was nothing tangible remaining to be sold. No more land, no secondary residence, no disposable assets of any note. Bakery implored and entreated with practiced earnestness, passionately assuring them that this particular instance would be entirely unlike all the others. This time, he proclaimed with unwavering conviction, he would achieve monumental success. If only they could somehow secure the necessary funds to send him overseas, to give him this one last chance. Jelani, his heart heavy with the weight of his son's pleas and his own limited options, spent the entire night in deep, troubled contemplation. And then, as dawn approached, He arrived at what he considered a viable solution. He would sell the sole remaining item of perceived value in their household, his daughter, Aisha. They would arrange her marriage to a prosperous, influential man. The substantial bride wealth received from this union would effectively finance Bakery's ambitious journey to Accra and his new business venture. A plan so breathtakingly heartless in its disregard for Aisha's happiness, yet so disturbingly straightforward in its execution. One evening, Jelani summoned Aisha into his presence. "Aisha," he declared, his voice tinged with an excitement that chilled her to the bone, "prepare yourself, my daughter. You are to be married to a wealthy, attractive, and well-regarded man named Seko. You are, of course, acquainted with him. He is exceedingly affluent, a man of considerable means. He will be arriving next week with his family to formally marry you." Aisha gazed at her father, her spirit plummeting into a chasm of despair. "But Papa," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper, thick with unshed tears, "I barely know this Seko. I do not love him. I feel nothing for him. I wish to attend school, Papa. I have ambitions, dreams for my own life." Tears welled in her eyes, threatening to spill over. But Jelani's expression, once perhaps kind, grew stern and unyielding. "You are a woman," he retorted sharply, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Your primary obligation, your duty, is to support this family. Your brother, Bakery, requires substantial funds to go to Accra and make something of himself. Your marriage will provide him with that crucial opportunity. This is a minor, insignificant forfeiture on your part for your brother's future prosperity and the family's honor. And for what conceivable purpose do you even require an education? A woman's rightful, God-given place is in her husband's house, attending to his needs, primarily in the kitchen." Her mother, standing silently by, nodded in mute, solemn concurrence, thereby irrevocably determining Aisha's bleak destiny. A few short, agonizing days thereafter, Aisha was wedded to Seko in a ceremony that felt more like a transaction than a celebration of love. She wept inconsolably throughout the entire wedding ceremony, her heart shattering into a million pieces, yet no one among the guests or family showed any discernible concern for her evident distress. Her bride price was duly collected, a sum that represented her worth in their eyes. The funds were promptly utilized to purchase Bakery's airplane ticket to Accra and to provide him with the initial capital to support his new, dubious aspirations. While Aisha was thrust unceremoniously into a marriage with a man she scarcely knew, a man she did not love, the initial few weeks were, surprisingly, tolerable, utterly devoid of affection or emotional connection, yet relatively peaceful. Aisha, diligently recalling her mother's stringent teachings about wifely duties, meticulously performed her responsibilities. She cooked his meals, tidied their shared living space, and managed the household with quiet efficiency. She made every conceivable effort to evade her husband's presence as much as possible, seeking solace in her chores, but tranquility, she was learning, seldom endures when it is constructed upon a fundamentally flawed and unjust base. It did not take an inordinate amount of time for Seko's genuine, volatile character to emerge from behind the thin veneer of early marital propriety. Seko, it turned out, was a man who derived pleasure or release from assaulting women, and he systematically subjected his new wife to increasingly frequent and brutal beatings. Aisha narrowly, perilously endured the initial months of her harrowing marriage. Upon the slightest, often imagined, instigation or perceived slight, Seko would beat her without a shred of compassion or restraint. One particularly terrifying night, merely a few short months following the wedding, he assaulted her so severely, with such unrestrained ferocity, that Aisha genuinely believed she would perish under the onslaught of his fists and feet. He would often return home late, heavily intoxicated from an evening spent at the local bar, demanding sustenance immediately. When she informed him, respectfully, that she had kept his food warm for him in the cooking pot, he would erupt, accusing her of being insolent, disrespectful, and indolent, and subsequently, he would beat her until her body was enfeebled, trembling uncontrollably, and covered in fresh contusions. It required remarkably little provocation to ignite his rage. A failed business transaction during his day, an unfavorable or frustrating day at his workplace, even the most trivial, unintentional error on her part. All these and more became convenient pretexts for Seko to unleash his pent-up fury upon her delicate, vulnerable form. One dreadful, unforgettable night, after another particularly savage beating that left her barely able to stand, Aisha felt she could bear the torment no longer. With painful contusions marking almost every part of her skin, a testament to his cruelty, she hastily packed a small, worn valise with a few essential belongings and fled directly to her father's residence, her only perceived sanctuary. She rapped on the familiar door with a desperate urgency, like a woman escaping death itself, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her mother opened the portal, her eyes widening in undisguised astonishment and disapproval. "Aisha, what on earth are you doing here at this hour?" she inquired, her tone more accusatory than concerned. "Mama," Aisha cried, her voice trembling uncontrollably, laced with fear and pain. "He will kill me if I stay. I cannot return there. Please, I beg you, allow me to stay." Hearing the disturbance at the entrance, her father, Jelani, emerged hastily from the inner chamber, his face contorted with a deep, immediate rage. "What is this foolishness?" he bellowed, his voice echoing through the small house. "Why are you here, Aisha, bringing shame upon us?" "Papa," she sobbed, gesturing to her battered face and body. "Look at me. Observe the wounds, the bruises on my body. Seko beat me again, mercilessly. If I return there, he will surely end my life this time. Please, Papa. Mama, I implore you, have mercy." But Jelani's expression, already hardened, became even more severe, his eyes cold and unforgiving. "You are a married woman now. You have no place here in this house," he thundered, his words like hammer blows. "It is far better to die with dignity in your husband's house than to bring such profound disgrace and dishonor upon your father's house." Despite their severe, heartless pronouncements, that evening they reluctantly permitted her to sleep under their roof, likely to avoid further public spectacle. Aisha wept herself into an exhausted, fitful sleep, clinging to the fragile, mistaken belief that she was at last, blessedly, secure. But she was tragically mistaken. The very next morning, her parents, without consulting her, summoned Seko to their home. When he arrived, looking smug and unrepentant, they compelled Aisha, weak and bruised as she was, to kneel before him in a humiliating display of subservience. "Beg your husband for forgiveness for your transgression," her mother instructed coldly, her voice devoid of any maternal warmth. "But Mama, I did nothing improper, nothing to warrant his anger," Aisha exclaimed, her heart shattering anew at this ultimate betrayal. "He beat me. I only attempted to survive his brutality." Before she could articulate another word of her defense, a forceful, stinging slap struck her across the face. But this time, the blow was not from Seko. It was from her own father, Jelani. "I said, kneel and beg him for his forgiveness," Jelani roared, his face a mask of fury. Tears streaming unchecked down her already bruised and swollen cheeks, Aisha, utterly broken, knelt before the man who had so recently and repeatedly nearly taken her life. "I am sorry," she whispered, the word tasting like ash and humiliation in her mouth. "Please take me back." Jelani looked down at her with an expression of profound disappointment, as if she were the one at fault. "Now go home," he commanded sternly, "and be a dutiful, obedient wife. Never, ever disgrace us in this manner again." Seko smirked, a look of pure, unadulterated triumph spreading across his face. He had unequivocally prevailed, and Aisha, broken in spirit and mortified beyond words, followed him meekly back to the house where her suffering, predictably, only intensified. After that fateful day, something within Seko seemed to irrevocably fracture, to become even more unhinged. If her own family, her blood, could so readily align with him against her, Who then could possibly restrain his violent impulses? The beatings became an almost integral, nightmarish part of Aisha's daily existence. He no longer required even the flimsiest justification to strike her. He beat her for serving meals a few minutes too late. He beat her for speaking too softly or too loudly, or sometimes for not speaking at all. He beat her, with callous indifference, in the presence of their young, terrified children. It became a horrifying, soul-crushing routine. Her closest, most loyal friend, Fatu, attempted everything within her limited power to rescue her from this living hell. "Aisha," Fatu said one day, her own eyes filled with tears of frustration and concern, "how much longer will you endure this unbearable situation? This is not a marriage, my dear friend. This is relentless torment. Please, for your own sake and for your children, you must leave." Aisha wept uncontrollably in her friend's comforting embrace. "But where will I go, Fatu? What options do I have? My parents will never accept me back into their home." Fatu squeezed her hand firmly, trying to instill some courage. "Then run," Fatu urged with quiet intensity. "Run as far as you can and never, ever turn back. Your children need you alive and well, Aisha. Don't wait until the tragic day they discover your lifeless body on the floor of that house. Come and stay with me. We will find a way together, somehow, but you absolutely must leave." Aisha sobbed more intensely, her body racked with indecision and fear. She knew, deep in her bruised heart, that her friend was entirely correct. But the paralyzing fear of the unknown, of stepping out into a world with no support, held her too tightly in its suffocating grip. Meanwhile, Aisha had a neighbor, a woman named Enkay. Enkay, as fate would have it, was also ensnared in the same dreadful, violent situation. Her husband subjected her to regular, brutal beatings too, just as Seko beat Aisha. Sometimes, these two women, kindred spirits in suffering, would sit together in the relative quiet of Aisha's small living area, their faces battered and bruised, their spirits weary, sharing their anguish and unspoken fears like wounded sisters bound by a terrible secret. One afternoon, both women sat side by side, gently tending to each other's fresh injuries, applying soothing herbs. Aisha looked at Enkay through painfully swollen eyelids. "How severe was it this time, my sister?" Aisha whispered, her voice hoarse. Enkay sighed with a profound bitterness that mirrored Aisha's own. "He was intoxicated again, as usual. He accused me of taking his money he likely drank away. I told him repeatedly I hadn't, but he beat me regardless, until he tired." She carefully wiped a tear from the corner of her eye with the back of her hand. "That is their unfortunate way, Enkay," Aisha added grimly, a hollow resignation in her tone. "They squander all their hard-earned funds in those wretched drinking establishments and then, predictably, hold us responsible when they are inevitably left with nothing." Aisha nodded slowly, her heart laden with an immense, shared sorrow. "It was precisely the same for me," she stated, her voice barely audible. "Yesterday, he claimed the food I served him was too cold, an insignificant thing, and he beat me as if I were a common thief caught in the act." She paused, her voice faltering, thick with emotion. "At times, Enkay, I wish I could simply vanish from this earth with my children and never, ever return to this life." Enkay regarded her with weary, knowing eyes. "I wish for that very same escape every single day," she confessed softly. "My own brother implored me to leave my husband years ago, offered me shelter. But my mother, much like yours, cautioned me sternly never to bring shame upon the family name by returning." She shook her head sorrowfully, a gesture of utter despair. "Now, here I am, simply awaiting the inevitable day this man finally kills me." Then, with a sudden urgency, she grasped Aisha's hand firmly, her grip surprisingly strong. "Promise me something, Aisha." Aisha looked at her, startled by the intensity in Enkay's voice. "If anything should ever happen to me, anything at all, you must flee immediately. Do not remain in that house a moment longer. Do not allow him, to kill you too. Promise me this, Aisha." Tears welled in Aisha's eyes, her own fear for Ife palpable. "Don't speak in such a dreadful manner, Ife," she whispered, trying to offer a sliver of hope. "You will not die. Perhaps. Perhaps one day, somehow, we will both attain freedom from this." But deep within their hearts, both women knew the grim, unspoken reality. Freedom seemed like a distant, unattainable fantasy, a dream for other, luckier women. "You will remain alive," Aisha replied sadly, though her words lacked conviction. But Ife squeezed her hand even more tightly, her eyes boring into Aisha's. "Aisha, please," she whispered, her voice urgent and strained. "Promise me. If anything ever befalls me, you will depart from your abusive home. For your children, for yourself." Tears welled in Aisha's eyes, blurring Ife's desperate face. She nodded slowly and promised softly, "Yes, Ife. I promise." That day, they embraced each other tightly, a hug filled with shared pain and a fragile bond, and waved a somber farewell as Ife departed for her own house, a place of similar dread. 2 days later, the devastating news struck Aisha like a physical blow, a bolt of lightning that seared her soul. Ife was dead. Her husband had beaten her, as was his usual pattern, but this time, in his rage, he had beaten her to death, and then, like a coward, he had fled. The local authorities were actively searching for him, but he had vanished without a trace. Aisha broke down completely, collapsing under the weight of grief and terror. She wept and lamented without cessation, her cries tearing through the oppressive silence of her own home. She reflected on their last poignant conversation, Ife's final, desperate request, and she realized with a chilling, bone-deep horror that it could easily, so easily, have been her lying lifeless on the floor. That very night, galvanized by Ife's tragic fate and her promise, Aisha did not hesitate for a single moment longer. With hands that trembled uncontrollably, she swiftly and quietly gathered her 2 sleeping children. Her heart pounded violently in her chest, a frantic drumbeat of fear, terrified that Seko might awaken and discover her escape attempt. But a new resolve had taken root. She no longer cared as much about his wrath as she did about her and her children's survival. All she desired, with every fiber of her being, was to escape this prison. A few tense hours later, under the cloak of darkness, she arrived at the modest residence of her best friend, Fatou. Fatou, awakened by the soft knocking, welcomed her with open, loving arms, tears of profound relief and shared sorrow filling her eyes. Without delay, Aisha, with Fatou's unwavering support, began the arduous process of reconstructing her shattered life. She laundered clothes for wealthier families. She scrubbed floors in shops and homes. She sold small goods like fruits and snacks by the roadside, enduring the sun and dust. She labored tirelessly from the first light of dawn till long after dusk, doing anything honest and necessary to provide for her children and to avoid being an undue burden on her generous friend, Fatou. Fatou supported her at every single juncture, offering encouragement and practical help, never once uttering a word of complaint or making Aisha feel unwelcome. Meanwhile, back at her parental home, life for Aisha's parents was rapidly and deservedly disintegrating. Bakery. The cherished, coddled son for whom they had sacrificed their daughter's happiness and future proved to be an even more complete and utter failure than before. Instead of diligently establishing a legitimate business in Accra as he had promised, Bakery predictably squandered all the money, the proceeds of Aisha's sale, on rampant gambling, excessive alcohol consumption, and a generally profligate and irresponsible lifestyle. Even worse, driven by greed and desperation, he became entangled in the dangerous world of drug trafficking. It was not long before his illicit activities caught up with him, and he was apprehended by the authorities and summarily deported back to his home country. One sorrowful, shameful day, Bakery returned to his parents' home. With nothing to his name but the threadbare garments he wore and a heart filled with bitterness and fury, he quickly became a terrifying source of constant terror in their once respectable household. He routinely pilfered money from his aging mother's meager savings. He systematically sold off every remaining item of value in the house, piece by piece, callously stripping them of their dignity until almost nothing of worth remained. When there was nothing further to steal or sell, Bakery, in his frustration and depravity, began to physically abuse his own elderly parents, the very people who had indulged his every whim. Jelani and Mama Aisha wept daily, their lives a living hell. Their once respected home, a place of standing in the community, had transformed into a frightening prison, ruled by their tyrannical son. They lived in constant, palpable fear of the very son they had so blatantly favored over their dutiful daughter. In the meantime, by stark contrast, Aisha's life was beginning to slowly but surely flourish. One particularly tiring evening, as she struggled to carry a heavy basin piled high with freshly laundered clothes for a wealthy client, a sleek, expensive vehicle pulled up quietly beside her. A tall, distinguished-looking, and kindly-faced man alighted from the car. "Allow me to assist you with that heavy load," he offered with a gentle kindness that took her by surprise. Startled by the unexpected offer from a stranger, Aisha instinctively stepped back, her guard up. "No, thank you, sir. I am quite all right," she said quickly, accustomed to fending for herself. But the man smiled with a warmth that seemed genuine and disarming. They began to converse tentatively. His name, she learned, was Jabari. He was a prosperous and respected businessman, the proprietor of several successful companies in the city. Before she could even fully process the unexpected turn of events, Jabari, impressed by her demeanor despite her circumstances, offered her a position as a receptionist in one of his well-appointed offices. Aisha, after discussing it with Fatu, went for an interview the very next day, her heart a mixture of hope and trepidation. And just like that, almost miraculously, for the first time in many long, arduous years, she had a consistent, respectable income. She could finally afford nutritious food for her growing children. She could finally contribute meaningfully to Fatu's household expenses, particularly the rent. She could finally, after so much suffering, begin to breathe a little easier. Over the subsequent months, Jabari and Aisha grew closer. He openly admired her quiet fortitude, her unwavering resolve in the face of adversity, her gentle perseverance, and her innate intelligence. In turn, Aisha perceived in him all the noble qualities she had once deemed utterly unattainable in a partner: patience, genuine benevolence, unwavering respect, and authentic, mature love. One day, after a respectful courtship, Jabari asked Aisha to marry him. Tears of profound happiness, a stark contrast to the tears of her first wedding, filled her eyes as she readily accepted his heartfelt proposal. They had a splendid, joyous wedding, surrounded by friends, including a beaming Fatu and Jabari's warm family. For the very first time in her adult life, Aisha had a true home, a place of safety, love, and respect. Her children, at last, had a genuine caring father figure in Jabari. And his support for Aisha and her family did not end there. He generously financed her further education, covering all her tuition fees, her textbooks, and even employed a kind nanny to assist with the children so Aisha could focus on her studies. Aisha graduated with a profound sense of accomplishment and pride. She was no longer the vulnerable, battered woman ensnared in a cycle of suffering and despair. She was a strong, self-reliant, educated woman, deeply loved, cherished, and esteemed by her husband and her community. Aisha often knelt by her bedside in the quiet of her comfortable home and offered heartfelt gratitude to God for so mercifully rewriting her life's narrative, for guiding her out of darkness into light. Back in her parents' dilapidated home, circumstances only continued to deteriorate alarmingly. Bakery's aggression and entitlement escalated daily, fueled by his failures and addictions. One night, after savagely assaulting Mama Aisha because she had not prepared a meal for him quickly enough, the elderly, broken couple sat together in the darkness, weeping inconsolably. "Biko. Oh, God." Mama Aisha sobbed, her body aching from her son's blows. What did we ever do to merit such terrible suffering in our old age? Jelani, his own eyes red-rimmed, wiped his tears with a trembling hand and whispered hoarsely, "We made profoundly erroneous decisions, my wife. We forsook our dutiful daughter, Aisha, and we revered and indulged our worthless son. Now, observe our wretched situation. This is our reward. We should go and entreat Aisha." Mama Aisha said faintly, her voice barely audible. "Perhaps she will have mercy on us." But Jelani wavered, shame and fear warring within him. Will she ever, can she ever, grant us forgiveness after what we did to her? They both wept profusely, acknowledging the bitter truth that they had no one remaining to turn to, no valuable possessions left, no semblance of tranquility, absolutely nothing but regret and fear. One morning, utterly broken, desperate, and with no other recourse, Jelani and Mama Aisha decided to take a desperate chance. Perhaps, just perhaps, Aisha, with her newfound success and happiness, would find it in her heart to forgive them. Meanwhile, Aisha was in her bright, modern office, diligently reviewing important business statements. She wore an elegant, well-tailored dress, her hair was impeccably styled, and her innate self-assurance radiated more brightly than the sun streaming through her office window. Suddenly, her polite secretary entered the office and said, softly, "Madam, there are 2 elderly visitors here to see you. They claim to be your parents." Aisha froze, her pen hovering over the document. She was utterly stunned. Her parents. They had come. She had not laid eyes on them in many years. Not since that terrible day they had callously compelled her to return to Seko's abuse. Not since they had unequivocally forsaken her, abandoning her to endure her profound suffering utterly alone. She was uncertain of the complex storm of emotions swirling within her. Anger, deep-seated resentment, a lingering sorrow, perhaps even a sliver of pity. She was not sure, but she knew she could not refuse them entry, if only to hear what they had to say. She instructed her secretary to admit them into her office. Jelani and Mama Aisha walked slowly, hesitantly into her spacious, well-appointed office. They appeared frail, incredibly weary, and utterly defeated. Their attire was worn, faded, and discolored. Her mother's hands were trembling visibly. Her father seemed a mere, stooped shadow of the proud, authoritative man he once was. For a long, agonizing moment, none of them could utter a single word. The silence in the room was heavy, thick with unspoken history and pain. Then, after what seemed like an eternity, Mama Aisha, her face etched with remorse, fell heavily to her knees on the plush carpet. "Aisha, my beloved daughter, please, I beg you, find it in your heart to forgive us," she sobbed, her words choked with tears. Jelani too appeared completely broken, his former arrogance gone. "We were grievously mistaken," he said, his voice trembling, cracking with emotion. "We treated you so unjustly, so cruelly. We forced you into that terrible marriage. We are profoundly, deeply sorry for the pain we caused you." Aisha stared at them in stoic silence for a while, her expression unreadable. Then, with a cold, simmering fury that had accumulated over many long years of suffering, she finally spoke, her voice low but firm. "Is that all you have to say? You're sorry?" She stood up slowly, her full height and composure a stark contrast to their broken forms, her voice sharp with years of unexpressed pain. "You did far worse than that. You didn't just compel me into a marriage. You sold me. You sold me like chattel. You deliberately, knowingly cast me into a living torment. And when I desperately sought your help, your protection, what did you do?" She took a deliberate step closer, her eyes blazing with a righteous, long-suppressed fury. "You sent me back to him. You made me kneel like a dog before the very man who nearly ended my life on multiple occasions. All for what? For your precious, worthless son, Bakery." Her mother sobbed harder, her shoulders shaking. Aisha, my child. We didn't know what else to do. We were desperate. We needed money for your brother's future. We genuinely believed, in our ignorance, that we were acting correctly, for the good of the family. But now, oh, now we comprehend the enormity of what we've done." She cried even more intensely, her wails filling the office. "Bakery has utterly destroyed us. He has beaten us, his own parents. He has sold every last one of the few valuable items we had remaining. We possess absolutely nothing now. Please, Aisha, we implore you, assist us. Please forgive us. We are old, and we desperately require your help to survive." But Aisha's righteous anger did not subside. If anything, it solidified. She gazed down at her kneeling parents, her heart as cold and hard as stone. "You made your decision a long time ago. You chose him over me, without hesitation." She let out a short, bitter laugh, devoid of any mirth. "You discarded me like common refuse. You sold me as if I were mere property to raise funds for him, your golden boy. And now, after all this time, now you expect me to rescue you from the consequences of your own actions." She looked away from them, her expression hard and unrelenting. "Where were you when I had nowhere else to turn, when I pleaded with you, begged you for your assistance, for a shred of mercy?" Her voice cracked slightly with the memory, but the anger persisted, undiminished. "You turned your back on me first, when I needed you most. So now it is your turn. Now you must endure the bitter consequences of your choices." Aisha's voice was cold, firm, and utterly decisive. She gestured pointedly towards the door of her office. "Leave my office. Now." Her parents screamed, pleaded, and groveled, falling to their knees again, begging for her compassion. But Aisha did not waver, her resolve unshakable. She did not look back at their retreating, broken figures. Some betrayals, she knew, were too deep, too damaging, to ever be forgotten or truly forgiven. Aisha later heard, through the community grapevine, that Seko, her former husband and tormentor, had remarried. This time, he had married a much younger, perhaps more naive, woman named Zainabu. Aisha felt a fleeting pang of sadness and pity for this unknown young woman. She knew, with a chilling certainty, what was likely to come for Zainabu. Seko would undoubtedly, sooner or later, transform Zainabu into another broken victim of his relentless abuse, perpetuating his cycle of violence. But Aisha did not permit herself to linger on those thoughts for long. Her life had improved significantly, beyond her wildest youthful dreams. She had moved forward, building a life of purpose and love, and she would not allow the heavy chains of the past to ensnare her again. She lived contentedly and happily with her loving husband, Jabari, and her thriving, well-adjusted children. She possessed a life she had strived for, fought for, a life that was hers and hers alone, built on resilience and newfound strength. Meanwhile, her parents continued to endure immense hardship and suffering. Bakery, true to form, had completely devastated their lives. He had misappropriated any remaining money they had. He had sold off their last meager belongings. And now, he was subjecting them to a daily reign of terror in their own home. One night, after Bakery had once again beaten Mama Aisha for not preparing food for him to his satisfaction, Jelani and Mama Aisha sat together in the darkness, weeping softly. "What did we ever do to deserve such a terrible fate in our twilight years?" Mama Aisha whispered, her voice raspy with sorrow. Jelani wiped his eyes with a weary hand and sighed deeply. "We made the wrong, unforgivable choices," he said quietly, his voice filled with resignation. "We abandoned our good daughter and worshipped our feckless son, foolishly believing he would be our salvation in old age." He shook his head sadly, the weight of his regret immense. "Now look at us. We are left with nothing but bitter regret and the consequences of our folly." Mama Aisha sniffled, her hope extinguished. "Perhaps we should go and beg Aisha again," she said softly, clutching at straws. Jelani was quiet for a long moment, contemplating their dire situation. "Will she ever forgive us?" Will she ever take us back after such a harsh rejection? Mama Aisha shook her head slowly, a tear tracing a path down her wrinkled cheek. No, she whispered, the truth finally dawning on her with painful clarity. Aisha can never truly forgive us. We don't deserve it. A few days later, Aisha sat in her comfortable, sunlit office, reviewing quarterly business reports. Her life was stable, secure. Her future was bright, full of promise. Suddenly, her ever-efficient secretary came in, a hesitant look on her face. Madam, your parents are here to see you again. Questions to reflect on. Would you forgive your parents if they had treated you like Aisha was? Do parents always favor their sons over their daughters? And if so, why? In your own family, do the daughters take better care of the parents as they age? I'd love to hear your thoughts below. And remember, if you enjoyed this story, like, share, and subscribe for more tales that make you think about the complexities of life. Until next time, stay strong, stay true.